Hey guys, what's going on? It's Andy Baker of andybaker.com and owner of Kingwood Strength and Conditioning. And we're going to come to you today with a little lesson on training the back, particularly how to get the back bigger and stronger. Okay, and this is an area where I find a lot of guys are lacking, both in a fundamental misunderstanding of why you would want to train the back, why you would want to get your back bigger, and then more importantly, how to actually do it. So I think most guys, if you ask them, would say yes, they want to get a bigger, stronger back. A lot of people really don't know how to go about doing that, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the most appropriate ways about how to build muscle across the back. Most guys will tend to lean towards programs that focus strictly on chins and deadlifts with not a lot of work on other valuable exercises, and that's basically okay for a good foundation. But to really grow the back maximally, you probably need to expand your exercise selection just a little bit, as well as your total volume. So even if you do use a very narrow selection of exercises, such as just pull-ups and deadlifts, you can actually still build a pretty good back with just maybe just 2 or 3 exercises. But what I have found is that most guys are lacking in total volume when it comes to back training. So the back is a collection of lots of muscle groups. It's not just one muscle group. These are big, strong muscle groups. We're talking about the lats, the rhomboids, the traps, the spinal erectors. They can tolerate a very heavy workload. So they are utilized in almost every major exercise that we do. They contribute directly or indirectly to every major exercise that we do. And they require a lot of volume in order to spur them onto new growth. Okay, so what I found is that most guys kind of treat upper back training the same way that they would treat bicep training. It's just something they kind of throw in at the end of a workout. They just kind of tack on to the end of their squat or bench training, that sort of thing. They don't devote a lot of time or effort or energy into the exercises, maybe other than the deadlift, that will actually grow a bigger, stronger back. So today we're going to kind of talk about both some programming structures of kind of how to go about setting up just a basic template that will allow you to prioritize some of your back training. And then after that, we're going to get into some kind of technique tips that you may or may not be aware of that will help your training. Let's start with kind of what I see as the biggest problem, which is just total volume. And this is a problem for a couple of reasons. One, back training is hard. If you do the exercises right, and I'm talking about deadlift variations, pull-ups, chin-ups, rows, and different types of row variations, barbell rows, dumbbell rows, those sorts of things, kind of the tried and true basics that will grow your back. These are hard exercises to do. They take a lot of energy out of you, and if you do them right, they can be very fatiguing. So when we just kind of haphazardly tack them on to the end of a workout where we've already done maybe a lot of heavy squats and a lot of heavy benching, then it's hard to devote the necessary amount of time and energy to train with the weights that we need to train with, okay, to keep the intensity high enough and to get the required volume in. So, if your current back routine right now is, 1 or 2 heavy sets of deadlifts per week, and then kind of 3 haphazard sets of chins some other time during the week, it's probably not going to be enough to stimulate a lot of growth in the upper back, okay? So what are we talking about in terms of volume if we want to prioritize our back development? Now, let me start by saying this. I'm going to recommend a pretty high volume for training the back. This amount of volume doesn't necessarily need to be maintained 365 days a year, 52 days or 52 weeks out of the year. A lot of times you're going to have periods of your training where you're going to have to prioritize one thing over the other. So you can focus on lots of different things, but you can't focus on all of them at once. So if this is an area where you're severely lacking, you might decide to devote 6, 8, 12 weeks of priority to training your back and getting it up to speed, and maybe a little bit less on some of your pressing and squatting type stuff, and then go back to more of a maintenance type routine for a lot of your back training and back into more priority towards maybe your squatting and your pressing movement. So you can maintain the strength and size of your back with a little bit less work than it's going to take to actually build it and grow it, okay? And then occasionally during the year, you're going to want to kind of reprioritize or re-emphasize your back training to make sure that everything that you've gained in terms of size and strength doesn't dissipate, okay? So a lot of this will just depend on the individual and where you're at with your training. So what I'm going to recommend is somewhere in between 10 and 20 sets per week for your back. How you distribute that total volume, I don't feel that it's critical. You need to do it intelligently, but I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 days a week is what you're going to be looking at in terms of back training. It's going to be hard to get that amount of volume, 10 to 20 total sets, in just one single session per week. And if you're doing that, you're not taking advantage of the gains that come when you train a muscle more frequently, and you're not going to be able to put as much effort into all of your exercises. Say if you're trying to do every single one of your major back exercises all in one session. So I would recommend that you break this up in a minimum of 2 days a week, but you could do it up to 4 days a week. Again, like I said, the back is a big muscle, big collection of muscle groups that can tolerate a little bit of a beating, okay? So as long as you're varying your exercise selection up a little bit, you can train the back with a pretty high dose of frequency. So let's just look at some common programs that people would run and how we would fit additional back work into there, keeping in mind that we're going to try to average between like 10 and 20 sets per week. If you're not used to this, you wouldn't start with 20 sets per week. You would start with, say, if you're between your deadlifts and your chins, maybe you're only doing 5 or 6 sets of total back training per week. You might start with just 10 or 12 sets and then bump it up over 20 over a couple of weeks. Try to maintain that for a month or two, and then you're going to probably have to throttle back down. If for nothing else, you're going to want to focus on some other aspects of your training and give them more priority. First is a 4-day split, which is really, really common for a lot of you guys. And so this is just kind of the standard 4-day split, focusing on one major lift per day. So this is very common. So you've got Monday being your bench day, Tuesday being your squat day, Thursday being your overhead day, and then Friday or Saturday would be your deadlift day. So the way that you could arrange this, very simply, say if you wanted to do pull-ups and chin-ups, and it is good to vary your grip and not just do the same exercise over and over again. So we would do a combination of pull-ups and chin-ups. It wouldn't really matter which day you put them on. You could put them on either day of the week. But let's say on Monday, we've got our bench training. So we're going to do all of our heavy bench stuff, maybe some bench assistance, whatever we're going to do, close grips, inclines, dips, whatever, kind of all the lifts that help the bench. And then you finish off with some pull-ups, maybe 5 or 6 sets of pull-ups. You could also put the pull-ups in the middle here. So you do all of your heavy bench training, and then you go in to do your pull-ups, knock out 5 or 6 sets there, and then you go on to your bench assistance type stuff, which is something that I like to do because it gives all those pressing muscles a little bit of a break. So if we're going to say we want to do bench and we want to do a high volume of bench and then we want to finish with some dips, instead of going bench, dips, pull-ups, we could go bench, pull-ups, give our triceps, chest, and shoulders a little bit of a break, and then finish with dips, and you're probably likely to be able to do that exercise with more weight and or more reps. So different ways to do it, but that would be a good day to fit your pull-ups on. Next day would be your squat focus day. So we would do all of our heavy squat stuff, and then you would do some sort of deadlift variation on that day. So I typically recommend something like stiff leg deadlifts, but you could also do an Olympic variation, say a power snatch or a power clean. Both of those are good developers of the upper back, especially the traps. Okay. And notice on this day, on the bench day, I didn't program barbell rows right there. And the reason I didn't do that is because typically the day before I squat, I'm going to want to lay off of exercises that fatigue my lower back. And if I do barbell rows hard and heavy, I'm developing a little bit of lower back fatigue, and I don't want that to compromise my squat training. So I'm going to do something more of what we call a vertical pull. I kind of don't like that terminology, but in this case it works. It's a lat exercise that doesn't involve the low back, so that we're fairly fresh for our squat training. Okay, we take Wednesday off, and then we're going to Thursday, and this is where we would do our heavy press training, and then whatever assistance work we want to do, tricep work, dips, close grips, whatever we want to do to help focus on the press. And then we would finish that session off maybe with some chins. So if we did pull-ups here, we do chins here, or vice versa. Like I said, it doesn't really matter on that sort of thing. Or maybe here we do pull-ups or chin-ups first in the week, and then on this day we do something like lat pull-down. So especially if you're not very good at pull-ups or chin-ups, you want to develop a little bit of endurance to get better at those. The lat pull down machine, I think, is actually a little bit underrated piece of machine equipment that can help you improve your chin ups or dips. And then Friday or Saturday would be our deadlift day. So maybe we do some light squats, front squats, something like that to warm up. Then we go into our deadlifts, or maybe even rack pulls, or you're alternating the two. So some sort of deadlifts or very heavy deadlift variation. And then as back off from there, we could do something like barbell rows. I often like doing barbell rows as back off work to deadlift. So the bar's already there on the floor. You just peel some plates off and you go right into barbell rows. And the rows in combination with the deadlifts or the rack pulls is a really good combination to build your back. And maybe on occasion, instead of doing the rows, you do something like shrugs. And then you would just divvy up the volume here. So you've got 4 days a week. So, if you did 3 sets on each of these, maybe 3 here, 3 here, 3, 3, and 3, that puts you at like 12 to 15 total sets. So you're right there in that 10 to 20 range. And then over time, maybe you could bump up the volume a little bit, especially on like the pull-ups and the chins, to get that set volume up closer to like 20 sets per week. So that's one way to do it, okay? Here's a standard 3-day-a-week program. So this would be like, a heavy, light, medium program or something like that. So a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, full body type of program. And then what we would have here, I'm gonna give you 2 examples. The first is, for you guys that maybe only like to pull from the floor once a week, if you don't recover well from pulling heavy deadlifts multiple times per week, you would put your heavy deadlift workout on Wednesday and then 2 different upper back movements on Monday and Friday. And I just put rows and pull-ups here, but it could really be anything. It could be any row variation. It could be, pull-ups and chins on both days and then deadlift in the middle. It really wouldn't matter. A variation of this would be and you could maybe even do this every other week if you didn't want to pull heavy twice a week every week. Maybe week 1, you do upper back, deadlifts, upper back, and then the next week, you could increase your deadlift frequency a little bit, and we do a deadlift variation here, maybe stiff leg deadlifts, maybe deficit deadlifts, snatch grips, something like that, RDLs, and then here we have chins, and then here we have deadlifts again, okay? So we've got one option where you're pulling from the floor once a week, one option where you're pulling from the floor twice a week. You could pick one or the other and stay with it, or you could alternate week to week, so that way you're pulling from the floor 3 times in a 2-week period, and that is usually pretty good. Most people, if they've built up their tolerance to deadlift volume, can handle 3 times in a 2-week period. You would just spread load the set volume across those weeks so that you achieve somewhere in that 10 to 20 range. And that's going to vary a little bit, again, on the individual. Depends on your work capacity, your training history, your age, your level of absolute strength. All those sorts of things are going to influence how many sets you're ultimately able to do. But I find as long as you get north of 10, and that's a bit more than what you've been doing, you're going to see some new gains in both size and strength in your back. This is another way to do it, and this is actually the way I like to do it for guys who are focused on more of a power building type routine. So they've got goals that are kind of 50-50, both strength and physique, okay? So they're not only wanting to strengthen their back so that they can bench better, deadlift better, squat better, that sort of thing, but they also want the look of having a bigger, more detailed back. And this is typically going to require a little bit more focus than what either of these programs are going to provide up here, where the back stuff is kind of always coming at the tail end of the workout. So in this type of program, you're probably going to have to be training 4 to 5 days a week in order to allot enough training days to get enough focus on your back, which is really going to be like, I'm going to say 1.5 to 2 days a week of dedicated back training, okay? So, and why do I say 1.5 days a week? What the hell does that even mean? My power building program that I prescribe for people is typically 5 days a week, and we've got 2 lower body sessions in there. And one of the lower body sessions is much more squat focused, and a lot of the assistance work is going to be more focused on the development of the quads, okay? So we might do things like front squats, leg presses, hack squats, things like that. And then the other lower body session of the week is going to focus more on the development of the hamstrings and the glutes. So that will often start with deadlifts. And if you want to prioritize your back, then I would start that hamstring workout, or that second lower body day of the week, always with deadlifts. And I would devote a lot of volume to training the deadlift and or its derivatives. So that might just be lots and lots of regular conventional deadlifts pulled from the floor, or it could be variations like stiff leg deadlifts, or even better, rack pulls. I would make the argument that rack pulls are almost even better than conventional deadlifts for building the back. The problem with rack pulls, you can't really do them and recover from them every week. At most, I like to throw in rack pulls every other week, or like every third week. They take a real toll on the nervous system and then locally on the low back. So you have to use them sparingly, but at either high volume or low volume, they allow you to handle a lot of weight, and they are a tremendous builder of the erectors and the traps and really the overall back. So if you've never done a high volume of rack pulls, you should try it. Check your soreness pattern a day or two later, and I guarantee you basically everything from really your hamstrings, glutes, and then the totality of your back is going to let you know that you had a very thorough back workout. So one of your lower body days, again, it's going to be lots of deadlifts, rack pulls, stiff leg deadlifts, things like that. And then you might also add in lighter, higher rep exercises like 90-degree back extensions, 45-degree back extensions, reverse hypers, things like that also target the lower back and the erectors with a little bit of higher rep training. Okay, and then you're going to have another day later in the week. So if this day comes on Monday, we would try to put the next next back day, which is going to be basically completely upper back movements, on a Thursday. And this is really going to be just a bodybuilding style workout. Okay, it's going to be what we want is we want a pretty broad exercise selection. So we want to do up to 4 or 5 exercises. We want a high set count, so anywhere from 3 to 5 sets per exercise. So you're looking at 10 to 20 sets, maybe just in this day alone. And we're going to use higher repetitions, so lots of work in like the 8 to 15 rep range, which the back tends to like, especially if you're doing a bunch of heavier stuff earlier in the week. So on your deadlift day, you might be doing lots of sets of 5. So you're getting your really heavy kind of density work there with the sets of 5. And then here, we're going to get some higher rep training, shorter rest intervals. What we're trying to achieve here is just a massive pump in the upper back. So the weight still matters, but what we're really trying for is a lot of volume and a lot of density, meaning we want a lot of work in a short period of time. We don't want to drag all this out over 2 hours and take 5 to 8 minute rest in between every set. We want to take 1 to 3 minute rest between sets, lots of work in the 8 to 15 rep range. You might utilize lots of methods like rest pause sets, drop sets, things like that. And again, a pretty broad selection of exercises, because again, the back is a complex group of muscles, and to train it thoroughly, you really do have to train it from different angles, with different grips, with different exercises, that sort of thing. So you can get most of it done with just deadlifts and chins, but to get all of it done and to add the detail and the size that you want, you're going to have to hit it with more exercises and at different angles. So you might start off with something like pull-ups, and then you might do like 5 sets of like wide overhand pull-ups, and then go hit 3 to 5 sets of V-grip pull-downs on the pull-down machine. Next, you might move into bent over barbell rows, and then transition to something like a one-arm dumbbell row or a seated cable row, something like that. And then you would finish off maybe with some higher rep shrugs. Nothing crazy heavy, not necessarily real heavy 500-pound shrugs out of the power rack, but just a medium to heavy set of dumbbells for sets of 15 to 20 reps, just trying to drive a lot of blood into the traps. A light barbell is fine. And then maybe some work for the rear delt. So things like, reverse flies, rows with a rear delt grip on various machines, reverse pec deck, face pulls, things like that. Again, you're not worried so much about using lots and lots of big, heavy structural exercises here. Machines are fine on here. Dumbbells are fine on here. Maybe you do your compound lifts with the, some bent over barbell rows or something like that. But some isolation, higher rep work is going to be okay here. And so in combination, this day with the heavy deadlift day, if you've never done that before, if you do that even for 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to see some tremendous gains in the growth and development of your upper back. All right, guys, so we already talked about how to set up your training week, whether you're training the back 2 days a week, 4 days a week, or 3 days a week. There's several different options there. The 4-day-a-week plan and the 3-day-a-week plan are pretty straightforward, because you're really probably only going to do 1 or 2 at most exercises per day. So that's pretty straightforward. You pick your pull-ups, your chin-ups, your rows, your deadlift variation, and you hit that hard for probably anywhere from 3 to 5 sets each day, and that's pretty much it. So what we're going to talk about now, how to set up your workouts for that other model that I gave you. Originally, it was down here on the bottom in the first part of the video where we have the 1.5 to 2 days a week of dedicated back training. Okay, so as you'll recall, the first day of the week would be on your lower body day. It was kind of your hamstring glute focused day, but it's also really a back day too, because what you're going to be doing is just training a very high volume of deadlifts or deadlift variations. And so what I would recommend on that day is probably just alternating between deadlifts and rack pulls if you're really wanting to focus on the development of your back, because you want to be sure to get those rack pulls in. And then you would finish that workout off probably with exercises like 45 or 90 degree back extensions, reverse hypers, things like that. Higher repetition exercises that force a lot of blood into the spinal erectors, and that's going to help make your deadlift stronger as well as kind of aid the growth and development of the spinal erectors. So that workout is pretty straightforward. So what we're mainly going to be talking about is how to set up a good workout for that second day of the week, which is really your bodybuilding style workout. And that's probably the day of the week that most of you guys watching this video are less familiar with how to structure. There's not really one way to do it. I'm just going to show you my way. There's lots of different ways to train the back. As I talked about, the back is not a singular muscle group. It's a collection of many different muscle groups. And to kind of optimally develop your upper back in the sense that a bodybuilder would focus on the development of their upper back, you do need a wider selection of exercises probably than just your deadlifts and your chin-ups, although that is always going to be really the foundation for most of the gains that you're going to experience. Deadlifts, pull-ups, chin-ups is a good foundation, but you need to go outside of that a little bit to kind of maximize your potential development. So I'm going to show you the way that I do it, the way that I like to program it for people, and then if that sounds good to you, then go for it. If not, then you can kind of come up with your own methodology based on your preferences, your equipment, that sort of thing. So what I usually like to do is go with about 5 exercises, okay? And I'll show you the reason why we do this. So I always start that workout with either pull-ups or chin-ups. Why? Well, because if I do them at any other time other than first, I can't do very many. So I'm not that great at pull-ups and chin-ups to begin with. So if I want to get better at them and keep my volume up and my strength up on those exercises, I really have to do them first in that workout, or else my performance on them really suffers and I just don't get the benefit of the exercise. So I alternate between pull-ups and chin-ups at each workout. And then whatever I do first, so if I start with pull-ups, I usually do 5 sets of each, sometimes more, but I do a minimum of 5 sets of either pull-ups or chin-ups. Sometimes I do them weighted, sometimes I do them with just body weight and go for max reps. I'll be honest, I don't really have a rhyme or reason as to when I go weighted or when I go body weight. I probably do it on about an every other workout basis, but I kind of just go by feel. If I feel strong, then I'll put on some weight and I'll try to do some weighted pull-ups or weighted chins. If I don't, then I'll just kind of rep out with body weight. Sometimes I'll just do 5 sets, max reps with about a 2-minute rest in between. Other times I might say, I'm just going to do 50 reps and I'm just going to get there in as many sets as it takes to get me. So if I get, 12 or 15 reps on the first set, then I'll just, rest a minute or two and I'll just keep doing set after set after set until I hit 50. Okay. So different ways to do it. Doesn't really matter. Just get your chins and your pull-ups in. Second exercise will often be pull downs. And what I do is I vary the grip. So whatever I started with first, so if I did, let's say, wide overhand grip pull-ups to begin with, then for my pull downs, I'll go with a narrow chin grip, or even more often, I'll go with a V grip, okay, to work the back in a little bit different manner. I really like the V grip pull down, especially for targeting the lower portion of the lats, okay? If I start with chins, a narrower, more reverse grip, then on the pull down machine, I'll go wide overhand grip. So I don't repeat the same movement pattern twice with the pull-ups and the pull down machine. Whatever grip I used on the chin up or pull up, I use the opposite grip on the pull down machine. So again, just my preference. I like the pull downs because anytime I've included pull downs regularly in my training, my pull ups and chin ups have always gone up. I like the fact that I can do a lot of reps in a short period of time, and it helps to build some muscular endurance that I need to get better on my pull-ups and chin-ups. So I'll do like anywhere 4 or 5 sets of 10 to 12 with a very short rest period. Very, very strict form on the pull-ups. I do not get sloppy on pull-downs. And I always find that that has helped me on my pull-ups or my chin-ups. Okay, following those two exercises, I'm a little bit pre-exhausted now, but my lats are full of blood and it feels good, and so I'll go to barbell rows next, almost always. Usually either barbell rows or T-bar rows. A bunch of different ways. Sometimes I pull them from the floor. Sometimes it's more kind of just bodybuilding style, kind of barbell rows are traditional, torso at 45, or even Yates style rows with the torso up a little bit more vertical. So it doesn't really matter. I like to do some barbell rows that I pull low into the abdomen. Okay, I pull down around belly button area or even a little bit lower. I also will occasionally do heavy dumbbell rows here, and I'll do the same way. I pull the dumbbell rows low into the into the torso rather than pulling up high here. And that's going to work. You'll find that when you pull the bar low, or the dumbbell or a machine, cable, whatever you're using, when you pull it lower into the abdomen, you're going to find that there's more activation of the total lat than if you pull up high. But that's what I usually do. Fourth is a row where I pull the weight to a different place on my torso. So you can use like a chest supported row, whether it's like a chest supported T-bar row, or if you have a machine. I have a Life Fitness seated machine row that I really like in here. It keeps my torso more vertical, and I pull the handles up higher here, and you'll find that that hits much more across the upper back, rear delts, and even a little bit of the traps when you pull that way as opposed to pulling low. So I do two different row variations, basically one where I'm pulling the weight low into the abdomen and one where I'm pulling the weight high up on the torso. And you'll find that you feel those in different places all over your back. And again, we want to hit the back with different grips, different angles, that sorts of thing to maximize development. So you're going to pull the weight into different spots on your body with different torso angles. And that's going to change where the exercise hits, okay? You don't have to do that. You don't have to get that involved or that complicated. But I think if you really want to get into building a bigger, more detailed back, you need to start thinking a little bit more like a bodybuilder would think, at least on this day, okay? And then I'll usually finish off with some shrugs. If I do rack pulls earlier in the week, I generally won't do shrugs because I find that the rack pulls, much more so than the deadlifts, just completely smoke your traps. And so I generally don't do another session of shrugs later in the week if I do the rack pulls. But if I deadlift, I'll often do shrugs, or I'll do maybe something for rear delts if I don't do the shrugs. So face pulls or bent over flies or something like that. So that's typically the way that I would structure that workout. Again, you don't have to do it. Maybe you do something a lot simpler. Maybe you just do pull-ups, barbell rows, and shrugs. Or maybe you just do pull-ups and barbell rows and do, a bunch of sets, 6 or 8 sets per exercise to get you to that 12 to 15 range, especially if you've got just a garage gym or something like that where you don't have a lot of machines and equipment to choose from. Just do pull-ups and barbell rows, but you need to do a lot of volume and a lot of reps on both of them in conjunction with the heavier deadlifts earlier in the week to maximize that development, okay? So use what you have and be smart and use this if you need it. So a couple of just little training tips here, and then we'll close. I'm actually going to start at the bottom. So just kind of carrying over what I was saying here. On back training, machines get a bad rap, but for back training, machines are okay. We're not saying that you want to exclusively do all of your back training with machines, but in conjunction with kind of the fundamental main exercises, your deadlifts, your rack pulls, your other deadlift variations, your bent over barbell rows, your pull-ups, and your chins. Adding on a few machine exercise on top of that is probably actually a good idea if you're wanting to increase your volume without adding too much stress to your overall system and also to your low back, especially if you want to do, if you want to increase the amount of, say, of rowing exercises that you do. A seated row machine, something like that can save your lower back a little bit while still allowing you to train with a pretty high volume on your upper back. So you don't want everything that you do to be if you're going to train with this type of volume, 10, 20 sets per week on the back, you don't want everything that you do to fatigue your lower back. You can't do all those 10, 20, 15 sets. You can't do all of that with, say, deadlifts and bent over rows. You're gonna blow up your lower back. You need some other exercises that allow you to train in a higher rep range. And so, throwing in this a few machines into the mix here is actually not a bad idea. So they get a bad rap, and again, we don't want to focus all of our training on that, but a few exercises here and there is a good idea. Full range of motion on these exercises. That includes any type of row motion that you do, any type of pull down that you do. Use a full range of motion, get a good stretch. There's plenty of evidence that putting a muscle in a deep stretch and using a full range of motion is far superior to using partial reps. I think that's especially true on the back. anytime I do pull downs, anytime I do rows, you see a lot of really sloppy shit online on YouTube when you look at back training, especially by some of the higher level bodybuilders. You don't really want to mimic that form and technique. You want to use a full range of motion. You want to get a good stretch. When you do your pull downs, when you do your rows, that sort of thing. You're going to activate a lot more muscle mass, and you're going to target the muscle much more thoroughly when you train that way. So don't get into the going overly heavy and doing a bunch of partial rep bullshit. It won't work as well. Okay. Reps, again, lots of sets in the 8 to 15 rep range. The upper back likes a lot of, on this day, the upper back especially likes a lot of higher rep volume. It will respond better to sets more in the 8, 10, 12, 15 rep range than if you're trying to do everything, heavy sets of 5, 6, 8 reps. If that's kind of your high end, you're not going to get the same benefit in terms of growth, if you will, if you increase that rep range a little bit, especially when you're using a high set count and a short rest period. You really want to focus on driving a lot of blood into all those muscle groups back there to induce the growth. And then you're going to get your really, really heavy work out of the deadlifts on your other day during the week. So you can occasionally you can do some of this work in a lower rep range with heavier weights to keep building your strength. First in the workout, if you want to start with some heavy weighted pull-ups, heavy weighted chins, in like the 3 to 6 rep range. I wouldn't do all of your work there though, just maybe a couple sets and then drop the weight and get the reps up a little bit. The occasionally working up to a heavy set of like 5 or 6 reps on a barbell row is not necessarily a bad idea, but again, you don't want to do all your sets that way. So much more work in the higher rep ranges. You're going to need some techniques to help you get this volume in a reasonable amount of time. And one of the things that I like to use a lot on these types of workouts are descending sets and drop sets. Okay, and so what's the difference? It's basically kind of the same thing. You're working up to one heavy top set on one of these exercises, and then all of the sets that follow that are going to be with a little bit less weight and potentially higher reps. Basically, the only difference is that a descending set gives you closer to a full rest period than a drop set does. So a descending set, let's say on an exercise like barbell rows, you might go up to 275, do a set of 8, pull a little bit of weight off, rest 2 or 3 minutes, do 255 for a set of 10, pull a little bit of weight off, rest 2 or 3 minutes, do 235 for a set of 10 to 12. So you're pulling a little bit of weight off each set, but you're taking somewhat complete rest intervals between sets. Okay, and that just allows you to push the pace of your workout a little bit more, not draw your rest time out too much, and maintain good quality strict form, which is really, really important when you're training your back. Drop sets work better on machines, dumbbells, things like that, and that's basically the same thing except you're taking no rest in between sets. So that might be on a machine, you get 12 reps with, say, 150 pounds on the stack, and then you immediately move the pin to 100 pounds, do another 12 to 15 reps without rest, okay? It's just a way to force more blood into the muscle, raise kind of the intensiveness or intensity of the workout without having to use a lot of extra weight, okay? So utilize these in your training a little bit if you need to. Lastly, I'm going to close with the fact that you do need to use straps when you're doing a really high volume of back training. Especially if you're not used to this, your grip will become the limiting factor very quickly. We are not trying to train our grip and our forearms on back day. We're trying to train our back, and your grip and your forearms will become the limiting factor when you're trying to do a very high volume of back training. You're trying to use as much weight as possible, very high reps, short rest intervals. If you don't use straps, the weights that you're going to be using are going to be far less than what you should be using to stimulate growth in your low back. So, don't use a whole lot of straps on your deadlift training. Try to do as much of your deadlift training as possible without straps, and your grip will be fine. So you don't need to be using this day as a grip day. Use it as a back day. So use straps. Even with the lighter exercises, I recommend using straps. If for nothing else, it's going to allow you to focus a lot more on doing these exercises, using your lats and using the musculature of your back and not pulling so much with your arms. One of the hallmarks of a beginner when they're training back is that they never feel it in their back, okay? Almost all the time, people that are not used to this type of training, certainly a novice or even an early intermediate that's just starting this type of training, will almost always tell me that they don't feel the exercise in their back. They strictly feel it in their arms. It takes a little bit of time to kind of establish that mind-muscle connection with the musculature in your upper back, but straps will help with that. And so if you kind of stubbornly refuse to use straps, which I know a few of you guys do, you're not going to get the results of this type of programming as you could if you used them. So my recommendation is to get some straps. All right, guys, let me know what you think in the comment sections. Hit me up with questions, and hopefully this helps your back development. All right, talk to you later.